The scorching August heat pressed down on Austin like a heavy blanket as Governor Greg Abbott wheeled through the marble corridors of the Texas state capitol. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the historic building's windows, but Abbott's mind was far from the architectural beauty surrounding him. His steel blue eyes were fixed on the tablet in his lap, scrolling through the latest social media posts from Representative Gene Wu. Another one, Abbott muttered to his chief of staff, Marcus Fleming, who walked beside him with measured steps. "Who's calling our border security bill fascist theater now, Fleming?" A tall man with graying temples and 20 years of Texas Republican politics under his belt shook his head. "Governor was been a thorn in our side since day one. His district loves him for it." Abbott's jaw tightened. The governor had built his career on decisive action and unwavering principle. From his early days as a Texas Supreme Court justice to his transformative tenure as Attorney General, he'd never backed down from a fight, especially one that involved defending what he saw as Texas values. The accident that had confined him to a wheelchair at 26 had only strengthened his resolve, turning personal adversity into political fuel. "Marcus, I want you to understand something," Abbott said, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of the most powerful governors in Texas history. "Gene Wu isn't just opposing our policies. He's undermining the very foundation of what makes Texas great. The man's turning every committee hearing into a circus, every vote into a referendum on our character." They entered Abbott's private office, where the afternoon light illuminated framed photographs of the governor with presidents, foreign dignitaries, and Texas legends. Behind his desk hung a painting of the Alamo, a constant reminder of the principles Abbott believed he was defending. Fleming settled into a leather chair across from the governor's desk. "What are you thinking, sir?" Abbott's expression grew. "Calculating. Wu represents District 137, Sharpstown, Alief, parts of southwest Houston. Heavily immigrant population, strong Democratic base. But demographics shift, Marcus. Districts change, and sometimes," he paused, his fingers drumming against his wheelchair's armrest, "sometimes a district needs new representation that actually reflects Texas values." Hey, before we continue, let me ask you, have you liked and subscribed to the channel yet? No? Then take advantage now and click the subscribe button below, and leave a comment with what you think of this video and which city you're watching it from. Your participation is very important to us. It helps our channel grow and bring more content like this. I'm counting on you. Now, let's continue. The implications hung in the air like the humid Texas heat outside. Fleming had seen that look before. It was the same expression Abbott had worn when he'd decided to challenge the federal government on immigration, when he'd pushed through the most restrictive abortion laws in the nation, when he'd taken on big tech companies over censorship. "Governor, redistricting won't happen again until after the next census. We're talking about a targeted campaign to unseat a sitting representative in his own district." Abbott's smile was thin but determined. Gene Wu thinks he can hide behind his immigrant story, his community connections, his legal background. But every politician has vulnerabilities, Marcus. Every district has pressure points. Wu's made himself the face of resistance to everything we've accomplished in Texas. It's time that resistance faced some consequences. Fleming opened his laptop and pulled up electoral data for District 137. Wu won his last election with 68% of the vote. He's popular, well-funded, and has strong community ties. "This won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is," Abbott replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades in Texas politics. "But remember something, I didn't get where I am by accepting the easy path. When I was lying in that hospital bed 30 years ago, doctors told me I'd never walk again. They were right about that, but they were wrong about everything else. I couldn't do." The governor turned his wheelchair toward the window, gazing out at the sprawling city of Austin below. Somewhere out there, in Houston's diverse District 137, Gene Wu was probably preparing for another committee hearing, another press conference, another social media post criticizing Abbott's latest initiative. "Set up a meeting with our political team," Abbott instructed, "and get me everything we have on Wu's voting record, his campaign finances, his associates, I want to understand every angle, every weakness, every opportunity. Fleming nodded, already making notes. And if Wu fights back, he's not exactly known for backing down from confrontation. Abbott's laugh was short and sharp. Marcus, I spent 12 years as Attorney General suing the Obama administration 51 times, and winning most of them. I've weathered hurricanes, power grid failures, and a global pandemic while maintaining conservative principles. You think one Houston Democrat is going to intimidate me? As Fleming left to arrange the meeting, Abbott remained at the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Outside, the Texas flag snapped in the evening breeze, its Lone Star reminder of the independent spirit that had built this state. Gene Wu might have the support of his district, the backing of progressive donors, and the sympathy of liberal media. But Abbott had something more powerful: the machinery of state government, the loyalty of Texas conservatives, and 3 decades of political experience. The battle for the soul of Texas was about to begin, and Greg Abbott had no intention of losing. The fluorescent lights of the Texas House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence hummed overhead as Representative Gene Wu shuffled through his notes, preparing for what he knew would be another contentious hearing. The committee room, with its worn carpet and mismatched chairs, felt more like a community college classroom than the seat of state power. But Wu had learned to appreciate its unpretentious atmosphere. Here, stripped of the grandeur of the main chamber, real work got done even when that work involved fierce political combat. Wu adjusted his tie and glanced around the room. As usual, the gallery was packed with advocates, lobbyists, and concerned citizens. Many were faces he recognized from his district: immigrant families, civil rights activists, community organizers who had traveled from Houston to Austin to make their voices heard. Their presence gave him strength. Representative Wu called Chairman Blake Morrison, a Republican from East Texas whose drawl could make even parliamentary procedure sound folksy. You ready for this morning's testimony on HB 1847? Wu nodded. Curtly, House Bill 1847 was Abbott's latest immigration enforcement measure, a piece of legislation that would effectively turn every traffic stop into a potential deportation screening. Wu had spent weeks preparing his opposition, consulting with immigration attorneys, community leaders, and constitutional scholars. As ready as I'll ever be, Chairman Morrison, Wu replied, his voice carrying just enough edge to signal his intentions. The committee room fell quiet as Morrison gavelled the hearing to order. Wu had been here many times before, but today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that this particular battle would have consequences far beyond the usual legislative skirmishes. As the bill's author began his presentation, Wu's phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Mia, watching on the live stream. Give them hell. Babe, Wu smiled slightly. Mia understood the political game better than most as a journalist. She'd covered enough Texas politics to know that today's hearing was about more than just one bill. It was about defining what kind of state Texas would be. The gentleman from Harris County is recognized for questions, Morrison announced, and Wu felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with political combat. Wu stood, his small frame somehow commanding attention in the cramped committee room. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to direct the author's attention to Section 3 of this bill, which would require local law enforcement to inquire about immigration status during routine traffic stops. The bill's author, Representative Johnson from Collin County, straightened his shoulders. That's correct, Representative Wu. We believe it's important for local authorities to assist in federal immigration enforcement. I see. Wu's voice was calm, but those who knew him could detect the steel underneath. And are you aware of the constitutional concerns raised by similar provisions in other states? The Fourth Amendment implications, the equal protection issues, Representative Wu, I believe we've crafted this legislation carefully to address those concerns. Wu opened his folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I have here 37 amicus briefs from constitutional law scholars, civil rights organizations, and law enforcement agencies opposing similar measures. Would the author like me to read them into the record? A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. Morrison banged his gavel. Representative Wu, please confine your questions to the bill at hand. Chairman, I believe understanding the Constitutional infirmities of this legislation is directly relevant to the bill at hand. Wu shot back. Unless we're planning to pass laws we know are unconstitutional just to make political points. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Wu could see Morrison's face reddening, could hear whispers from the Republican side of the committee, but he also saw nods of approval from the gallery, phones recording his words for social media, activists scribbling notes for their next press release. Representative Wu, Johnson interjected, "I think you're overstating the constitutional concerns. This bill simply allows local authorities to enforce federal law." Wu's eyes flashed. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. "Representative Johnson, with respect, this bill doesn't just allow local enforcement, it mandates it. It turns every police officer into an immigration agent, every traffic stop into a potential family separation, and it does so in direct violation of the anti-commandeering doctrine established by the Supreme Court." "The gentleman's time has expired," Morrison announced quickly. "Chairman, I request additional time to fully explore these constitutional issues." Request denied. The committee recognizes Representative Martinez from Bexar County. But Wu wasn't finished. As Martinez began her questions, Wu pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. Within minutes, his social media accounts lit up with a real-time critique of the hearing, complete with constitutional citations and personal anecdotes from his district. "Watching GOP legislators ignore constitutional law in real time," he typed. "This isn't governance, it's performance art for the far-right base." The post began receiving likes and shares immediately. Wu had built a following of over 100,000 people across his social media platforms, a mix of constituents, activists, and political observers who appreciated his willingness to call out what he saw as Republican overreach. After the hearing, as committee members and witnesses filtered out of the room, Wu was approached by Maria Santos, a community organizer from his district who had driven up from Houston for the hearing. "Gene, that was amazing," she said, her eyes bright with admiration. "You said what needed to be said." Wu smiled, but his expression remained serious. "Maria, I appreciate that, but you know this bill is going to pass committee, right? We don't have the votes to stop it here. So what do we do?" Wu gathered his papers, his mind already moving to the next phase of the battle. "We take it to the people. We make sure every voter in Texas understands what this bill really means. And we prepare for the real fight on the House floor." As they walked toward the elevators, Wu's phone buzzed with notifications. His social media post was going viral, picked up by national progressive accounts and generating hundreds of comments. But mixed in with the support were darker messages, personal attacks, veiled threats, and ominous warnings about consequences for his opposition to conservative legislation. One comment in particular caught his eye. "Wu thinks he can hide behind his immigrant story forever. Time for Texas to clean house." Wu showed the message to Maria, who frowned. "Gene, you need to be careful. Some of these people are serious." Wu pocketed his phone and pressed the elevator button. "Maria, if I worried about every threat from keyboard warriors, I'd never get anything done. Besides," he smiled grimly, "I didn't survive growing up in Sharpstown just to be intimidated by anonymous trolls." But as the elevator doors closed and they descended toward the Capitol's ground floor, Wu couldn't shake the feeling that today's hearing had marked a turning point. The opposition to Abbott's agenda was intensifying, and so was the pushback against that opposition. The question was, who would blink first? Outside the Capitol, the Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the limestone steps, and Gene Wu prepared for the long drive back to Houston, back to his district, back to the communities that had sent him here to fight battles like this one. He had no idea that, miles away in the governor's mansion, Greg Abbott was already planning the next phase of a much larger war. The governor's mansion sat like a white-columned fortress in the heart of Austin, its antebellum architecture a reminder of Texas's complex history. Inside the mansion's private study, Greg Abbott reviewed intelligence reports that would have made a military strategist proud. Spread across his mahogany desk were polling data, demographic analysis, opposition research, files, and detailed maps of Harris County's District 137. "Tell me about Wu's vulnerabilities." Abbott said to the three people seated around his desk: Marcus Fleming, his chief of staff; Sarah Chen, his political director; and Jake Morrison, a private investigator who specialized in what he euphemistically called candidate research. Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had managed successful campaigns across the South, opened her leather portfolio. Governor Wu's got a strong base, but there are pressure points. His social media presence cuts both ways. He's popular with progressives, but some moderates in his district think he's too combative, too focused on Austin politics instead of local issues. What about his voting record? Abbott asked, his fingers steepled in front of him. Morrison, a rumpled man who looked more like an accountant than an investigator, cleared his throat. Wu's been consistent on progressive issues: criminal justice reform, immigration, reproductive rights. But here's the interesting part: he's also voted for some business-friendly measures that his progressive allies didn't like. There's potential daylight there. Fleming leaned forward. Governor, we've identified 3 possible approaches. We can fund a primary challenger from Wu's left, someone who attacks him for not being progressive enough. We can redistrict him out, though that's a long-term play. Or, he paused, or, Abbott prompted, or we go nuclear. Full-scale opposition research, coordinated attack campaigns, pressure on his funding sources. But that's high-risk, high-reward territory. Abbott's expression remained neutral, but Chen could see the calculation in his eyes. She'd worked with the governor long enough to recognize when he was weighing political options with the same methodical precision he'd once used to analyze legal cases. What about his family? Abbott asked quietly. Morrison consulted his notes. Wife's a journalist, Mia Shea, works for a Houston news station. 2 young kids. Clean family life, no scandals. Wu's actually pretty careful about keeping his family out of the political spotlight. Smart man, Abbott murmured. What about his finances? Standard legislative salary, some legal work on the side before he took office. Wife's income from journalism. They live comfortably, but not extravagantly. No obvious financial irregularities. Chen shifted in her chair. Governor, if I may, Wu's strength is also his weakness. He's built his brand on being the outsider, the immigrant kid who made good, the David fighting Goliath. But that narrative only works as long as he stays sympathetic. If he starts looking like just another politician— Abbott nodded slowly. Go on, we don't attack him directly. We create situations where he has to respond, where his responses make him look partisan, out of touch, or extreme. We force him to defend positions that don't play well with moderate voters. Fleming looked skeptical. Sarah, Wu's pretty media savvy. He's not going to fall into obvious traps. Maybe not obvious ones, Chen replied with a slight smile. But everyone has buttons, Marcus. Everyone has issues that make them react emotionally instead of strategically. Abbott turned to Morrison. What makes Gene Wu angry? The investigator flipped through several pages of notes. Attacks on his community, on immigrants, on what he sees as injustice. But also, and this is interesting, he has a strong reaction to what he perceives as corruption or abuse of power. Guy's got a real thing about fairness, about the system working for everyone. So he's an idealist, Abbott mused. A combative idealist, Fleming added, which could work in our favor. Abbott wheeled his chair to the window overlooking the mansion's gardens. Outside, the late September heat was finally beginning to break, and the first hints of autumn colored the oak trees. Texas political seasons followed their own rhythm, and Abbott could sense that this one would be particularly intense. Here's what we're going to do, Abbott said, turning back to face his team. Chen, I want you to start identifying potential primary challengers for Wu. Look at community leaders, local officials, maybe even some progressive activists who think Wu isn't liberal enough. We don't need to support them directly, just make sure they know the opportunity exists. Chen made notes on her tablet. Understood, Governor. Fleming, I want you to coordinate with our legislative leadership when we bring bills to the floor that Wu opposes. I want maximum pressure. Make him take hard votes. Make him defend unpopular positions. Force him to be the face of Democratic opposition. Already working on that, sir. Abbott turned to Morrison. And Jake, I want you to expand your research. I don't want surprises. every speech was given, every vote he's cast, every interview he's done. If he said something that could be taken out of context or used against him, I want to know about it. Morrison nodded. How deep do you want me to go on associates, campaign contributors, that sort of thing? Abbott's pause was almost imperceptible, but Chen caught it. She'd seen the governor make hard choices before, seen him weigh political necessity against personal preference. Everything legal and ethical, Abbott said finally. We're not going to become what we're fighting against. But Wu's made himself a public figure, a political combatant. His record is fair game. As the meeting broke up and his advisors filed out, Abbott remained at the window, watching the autumn light fade over Austin. Somewhere to the southeast, in the sprawling diversity of Houston's District 137, Gene Wu was probably at a community meeting or a school board hearing, doing the retail politics that had made him popular with his constituents. Abbott respected that, in a way. Wu was clearly dedicated, clearly sincere in his beliefs. But sincerity and dedication to the wrong cause could be more dangerous than cynical opportunism. Wu wasn't just another liberal politician, he was smart, articulate, and effective. He was turning legislative hearings into progressive theater, committee votes into viral social media content that made him dangerous. And in Texas politics, dangerous opponents required serious responses. Abbott's phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Cecilia. Dinner in 20 minutes. Don't be late, your mother's joining us. He smiled despite himself. Even governors had to answer to their wives and mothers. But as he prepared to leave his study, Abbott made a mental note to call Sarah Chen first thing in the morning. The campaign against Gene Wu was about to begin in earnest, and Abbott wanted to make sure every detail was perfect. After all, he hadn't gotten where he was by leaving anything to chance. The community center in Sharpstown buzzed with the familiar energy of a Saturday morning town hall. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a small stage where Gene Wu stood behind a modest podium, fielding questions from constituents in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. The building itself a converted warehouse with fluorescent lighting, and linoleum floors might not have looked like much, but to Wu, it represented the beating heart of his district. Representative Wu called out Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman in the third row whose weathered hands spoke of decades of hard work. My grandson got pulled over last week. The officer asked about his papers even though he was born here in Houston. Is this because of that new law? Wu's jaw tightened. House Bill 1847 had passed the committee and was heading to the floor for a full vote. Despite his passionate opposition, he knew the math Republicans had the votes to pass it. And Governor Abbott would sign it with enthusiasm. Mrs. Rodriguez, the law hasn't taken effect yet, but some officers are already acting like it has. Wu replied in Spanish before switching back to English for the broader audience. This is exactly why we fought so hard against HB 1847. It creates a climate of fear and suspicion that affects all of us, regardless of immigration status. From the back of the room, a man in his 40s raised his hand. Wu recognized him as David Park, a small business owner who ran a Korean restaurant in the district. Gene, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but some of my customers are worried you're too focused on fighting with Austin instead of helping us here at home. When's the last time you talked about economic development or infrastructure? The question hit harder than Wu expected because it echoed concerns his own staff had raised. His communications director, Jennifer Martinez, had warned him that his high-profile battles with Abbott were overshadowing local issues that mattered to many constituents. David, that's a fair question, Wu admitted, stepping out from behind the podium to move closer to the audience. But here's the thing, I can't help bring jobs to our community if half our workforce is afraid to leave their houses. I can't improve our schools if families are too scared to engage with local government. Everything's connected. And murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. But Wu could see that not everyone was convinced. In the middle sections sat the Nguyen family, Vietnamese immigrants who had built a successful auto repair business. Mr. Nguyen's expression was skeptical. Representative Wu, Mr. Nguyen said in accented English, my family came here legally. We worked hard, followed rules. Why should we worry about immigration law if we did nothing wrong? It was a question Wu had heard variations of throughout his career, and it never got easier to answer. The assumption that following the law guaranteed protection from government overreach was something his own family had believed until reality taught them otherwise. Mr. Nguyen, I understand that perspective. My parents felt the same way when they brought me here from Taiwan. But the problem with laws like HB 1847 is that they don't just affect people who break rules. They affect everyone who looks like they might be foreign, everyone with an accent, everyone whose last name sounds different to some people. Wu pulled out his phone and showed the room a photo from the previous week's committee hearing. This is Maria Santos. She's been a U.S. citizen for 30 years, works as a nurse at Methodist Hospital. Last month, she was questioned about her immigration status while grocery shopping because someone overheard her speaking Spanish to her granddaughter. The room fell quiet. Wu could see the recognition in many faces, the understanding that government power, once unleashed, didn't always make careful distinctions. After the town hall, Wu lingered in the parking lot, shaking hands and having the one-on-one conversations that reminded him why he'd gotten into politics in the first place. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who had known his family since childhood, pulled him aside. "Jean, you be careful," she said in Mandarin, her voice low. "There are people asking questions about you in the community. People who don't usually come around here." Wu frowned. "What kind of questions?" "About your voting record, about your family, about who supports you." "Professional people with nice clothes and clipboards. They say they're doing research for a news story." But she shrugged expressively. After Mrs. Chen walked away, Wu felt a chill despite the October heat. Opposition research was part of politics, but having investigators canvass his childhood neighborhood felt like a line being crossed. His phone rang as he was getting into his car. Jennifer Martinez's name appeared on the screen. "Jean, we need to talk. Can you come by the office?" 30 minutes later, Wu sat in his district office, a modest space in a strip mall between a Vietnamese pho restaurant and a Mexican bakery. Jennifer, a sharp political operative in her early 30s, had printouts spread across the conference table. "Jean, look at this," she said, pointing to a series of social media analytics. "Your engagement numbers are through the roof, but the sentiment analysis is getting more polarized. You're gaining followers, but you're also generating more intense negative reactions." Wu studied the charts. His Twitter followers had grown by 15,000 in the past month, but the replies to his posts were increasingly hostile. Death threats, which had once been rare, were becoming routine. "There's something else," Jennifer continued, pulling up a different screen. "We've been tracking unusual activity around your social media accounts, coordinated attacks, bot networks amplifying negative messages about you. This isn't organic opposition, Jean. Someone's funding this." "Abbott?" Wu asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Can't prove it directly, but the timing coincides with your committee performance on HB 1847. And here's the concerning part: some of these attacks are starting to focus on your family." Jennifer showed him a series of posts questioning Mia's journalism credentials, suggesting she was biased because of her marriage to Wu, even posting photos of their children from public events, with ominous captions about accountability. Wu felt his temper flare. "They want to come after me, fine, but my kids? Mia's just doing her job as a reporter. Jean, you need to be strategic here. Abbott's trying to bait you into responding emotionally, into looking like the angry partisan. Don't give him what he wants." But even as Wu nodded agreement, he was already composing tweets in his head, already planning his response to what felt like an escalating attack on everything he held dear. Jennifer could see it in his expression. "Jean, I'm serious. Think before you post anything. Abbott's not just trying to beat you, he's trying to change you, to turn you into the kind of politician who responds to every provocation, who looks unstable and reactive." Wu's phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Kids asking why strangers are taking pictures of our house. Call me." As he dialed his wife's number, Wu realized that the battle with Abbott had moved beyond legislative chambers and committee rooms. It was now personal, targeting not just his political career, but his family's sense of safety and privacy. The war for Texas was escalating, And Jean Wu was about to discover just how far his opponents were willing to go. The Texas State Capitol dome gleamed in the early morning sun as House Bill 1847 prepared for its final floor vote. Inside the House chamber, the atmosphere crackled with the tension that marked the most controversial legislative battles. Gallery seats were packed with advocates on both sides, while reporters filled the press section, their cameras ready to capture what everyone knew would be a heated debate. Jean Wu sat at his desk on the Democratic side of the aisle, reviewing his speech notes one final time. Around him, his colleagues prepared their own remarks, but Wu knew that as the most vocal opponent of Abbott's immigration bill, all eyes would be on his performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Speaker Tom Olivares, his voice echoing through the chamber, "the House will come to order for consideration of House Bill 1847. As the bill's author began his presentation, Wu's phone vibrated with a text from Jennifer. "Social media team is ready. Whatever you say in there will be trending within minutes. Make it count." Wu had spent the previous night crafting his speech, balancing legal arguments with personal appeals, constitutional principles with human stories. But as he listened to the Republican presentation full of abstract references to law and order and state sovereignty, he felt his carefully prepared remarks shifting toward something more visceral. The chair recognizes Representative Wu. For 5 minutes in opposition, Wu stood and walked to the front microphone, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. In the gallery, he could see faces from his community, people who had traveled from Houston to witness this moment. Their presence gave him strength, but also increased the pressure he felt to speak not just as a legislator, but as their voice. "Mr. Speaker, colleagues, I rise in strong opposition to House Bill 1847, Wu began, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "This bill is not about law enforcement. It's not about public safety. It's about fear of people who look different, sound different, worship differently than some narrow vision of what it means to be Texan." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Republican members shifted in their seats, while Democrats leaned forward, sensing that Wu was building towards something significant. "I want to tell you about my district," Wu continued, his voice gaining intensity. "Sharpstown, Alief, Southwest Houston, communities built by immigrants from around the world. Vietnamese boat people who fled war, Mexican families who came seeking opportunity, Chinese immigrants like my parents who believed in the American dream." Wu's eyes found the gallery, connecting with the faces of his constituents. These are the people this bill targets. Not criminals, not threats to public safety, but families trying to build better lives for their children. Representative Johnson, the bill's author, called out from his seat. "Will the gentleman yield for a question?" Wu paused, knowing that yielding time during floor debate was risky, but also recognizing an opportunity. "I yield for a brief question." Johnson stood at his desk. "Does the gentleman not agree that local law enforcement should assist federal authorities in enforcing immigration law?" Wu had anticipated this question. It was the standard Republican talking point, designed to make opposition sound unreasonable. But Wu had learned from years of courtroom experience that the right answer could turn a question into an opportunity. "I thank the gentleman for his question," Wu replied. "But let me ask you something in return. Do you want police officers spending their time checking papers at traffic stops? Or do you want them investigating actual crimes? Do you want immigrant witnesses afraid to report crimes? Or do you want safe communities?" The exchange was exactly what Wu needed to pivot to his strongest argument. "Mr. Speaker, this bill doesn't make us safer, it makes us less safe. When immigrant communities can't trust police, criminals operate with impunity. When families are afraid to send their children to school or seek medical care, we all suffer." As Wu spoke, his phone placed discreetly on the podium showed notifications streaming in. His words were being live tweeted, shared, and commented on in real time. The hashtag Texas debate was trending nationally. But there's something even more fundamental at stake here, Wu continued, his voice rising with passion. "This bill represents a betrayal of Texas values, the same values that welcomed my family, that built this great state through the contributions of people from around the world." Wu paused, letting the silence hang in the chamber for a moment. Texas wasn't built by people who were afraid of diversity. It was built by people who embraced it, who saw strength in difference, who understood that our diversity is our greatest asset. From the Republican side, Representative Morrison called out, "Mr. Speaker, I object to the gentleman impugning the motives of those who support this legislation." Speaker Olivares banged his gavel. The gentleman is recognized to continue his remarks without impugning motives. Wu nodded to the speaker, but his eyes flashed with the combative energy that had made him famous. "Mr. Speaker, I'm not impugning anyone's motives. I'm questioning their methods and their results. When this bill passes, and we all know it will, immigrant families will be driven deeper underground, crime will increase, trust in law enforcement will erode, and Texas will be less safe, less prosperous, and less true to its founding principles." Wu's time was running out, but he had one more card to play. Reaching into his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small, worn photograph. "Mr. Speaker, I want to show the House something," Wu said, holding up the photo. "This is a picture of my parents on the day they became American citizens. My father is wearing his best suit, the only one he owned. My mother is holding a small American flag. They believed they were joining a country that judged people by their character, not their country of origin." The chamber had gone completely quiet. Even Republican members were listening intently. House Bill 1847 tells families like mine that they were wrong, that Texas is a place where the color of your skin, the sound of your accent, or the origin of your last name makes you suspect. That's not the Texas I know. That's not the America my parents believed in. Wu's voice softened, but his words carried across the chamber with crystal clarity. "I urge my colleagues to vote against this bill, not because it's politically convenient, but because it's right, because Texas is better than this, because we are better than this." As Wu returned to his seat, the chamber erupted in a mix of applause from the gallery and angry voices from Republican members, objecting to what they saw as grandstanding. Speaker Olivares gavelled for order, but the energy in the room had shifted. Wu's phone was now buzzing continuously. Text messages from supporters, notifications from social media, missed calls from reporters. Jennifer Martinez had been right. His speech was already viral, shared thousands of times across platforms. But mixed in with the support were darker messages, anonymous accounts posting his home address, threatening his children, promising consequences for his opposition to the bill. Wu felt a familiar mixture of pride and anxiety as he realized that his words had reached far beyond the chamber walls. 20 minutes later, the vote was called, as expected. HB 1847 passed along party lines, 87 to 62. But Wu knew that the real battle was just beginning. His speech would be replayed on news programs, dissected by political commentators, and used in fundraising appeals by both sides. As representatives filed out of the chamber, Wu was surrounded by reporters. Questions came from multiple directions. "Representative Wu, how do you respond to critics who say your speech was divisive? Will you be running for higher office? What's your reaction to the threats you've been receiving?" Wu raised his hand. "For quiet, I'll have a statement later today. Right now, I need to get back to my district and talk to the families who will be affected by this law." But as he pushed through the crowd of reporters and lobbyists, Wu caught sight of a familiar face near the back of the group. Jake Morrison, Abbott's investigator, taking notes and photos with the practiced discretion of a professional observer. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Morrison nodded slightly, a gesture that somehow felt more like a warning than a greeting. Wu realized that his passionate floor speech, while energizing his base, had also painted an even larger target on his back. The drive back to Houston would give him time to think, to plan his next moves, but first, he needed to call Mia and make sure she and the children were safe. The political had become personal, and Jean Wu was about to discover just how personal Abbott was willing to make it. The governor's mansion dining room had hosted presidents, foreign dignitaries, and Texas power brokers, but tonight it served a more intimate purpose. Greg Abbott sat across from his wife Cecilia, sharing a quiet dinner while reviewing the political fallout from Jean Wu's floor speech. Earlier that day, "Greg, you need to see this," Cecilia said, holding up her tablet. "Wu's speech has been viewed over 2 million times. The hashtags supporting him are trending nationwide. Abbott took a bite of his barbacoa taco, his expression remaining neutral despite the news. Passion plays well on social media, Cecilia, but governing requires more than viral moments. Still, you have to admit the man is effective, she replied. Scrolling through comments on Wu's speech, look at some of these responses, people from all over the country calling him a hero, comparing him to civil rights leaders. Abbott set down his fork and studied his wife's face. After decades of marriage, he could read her expressions like a political poll. You're concerned I'm making a mistake. Cecilia chose her words carefully. She had learned to navigate the intersection of marriage and politics with the skill of a diplomat. I'm concerned about the optics, Greg. Wu comes across as defending families and children. You risk looking like you're attacking the American dream. The American dream includes following the law, Abbott replied, but his tone lacked its usual conviction. Greg, I know your heart. I know you care about families, about children. But sometimes the politics of a situation can obscure those values. Wu's not wrong about everything. You know, Abbott's phone buzzed with a call from Sarah Chen. He glanced at Cecilia apologetically and answered, Governor, we need to discuss the Wu situation. Chen's voice was tense. His speech today has changed the dynamic significantly. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, Abbott said, ending the call. He turned back to Cecilia. What would you do? It was a question he didn't ask often, but when he did, Cecilia knew he was genuinely struggling with a decision. I'd be very careful about making this personal, she said. Wu's got a compelling story, a sympathetic family, and now he's got national attention. If you're seen as bullying him, it could backfire spectacularly. Abbott nodded slowly, then wheeled himself to his study to return Chen's call. When she answered, he could hear the tension in her voice immediately. Governor, we've got a problem. Wu's speech has energized Democratic fundraising nationwide. His campaign account has received over $100,000 in small dollar donations since this afternoon. Progressive groups are treating him like the next Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Abbott rubbed his temples. What's our polling showing? Mixed results. Wu's favorable ratings have jumped in his district, but he's also generating strong negative reactions. In conservative areas, the problem is, he doesn't need to win over conservative areas, he just needs to hold his district and inspire Democrats elsewhere. In our opposition research, Chen paused. Governor, I need to be straight with you. Wu's clean, really clean. No financial irregularities, no personal scandals, no questionable associations. His biggest vulnerability might be that he's too idealistic, too willing to fight battles he can't win. That's not a vulnerability, that's a political asset, Abbott muttered. There is one angle, Chen continued. Wu's been so focused on high-profile fights that some local issues in his district have gotten less attention. Infrastructure problems, business development, day-to-day constituent services. We could potentially find a local candidate who campaigns on getting things done instead of making speeches. Abbott was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. A primary challenge was safer than a general election fight, but it would require finding the right candidate and the right message. What about his family situation? Any pressure points there? Chen's discomfort was audible. Governor, I have to advise against that approach. Wu's wife is a respected journalist. His kids are young and completely innocent. Any attacks on his family would make you look like a bully and him look like a victim. After ending the call, Abbott sat in his study, staring at a framed photograph from his early days as Attorney General. He'd built his career on principled fights, on standing up to federal overreach and defending Texas values. But somewhere along the way, the fight had become about winning rather than governing. His phone rang again. This time it was Jake Morrison, his investigator. Governor, I've been monitoring Wu's social media activity since his speech today. He's being more careful about his posts, clearly getting professional advice. But there's something interesting. Go on. Wu's been engaging with some pretty far-left activists on Twitter. Climate change radicals, police abolitionists, people who want to defund ICE completely. He hasn't endorsed their positions, but he's been liking their posts, retweeting their content. Abbott felt a spark of interest. Screenshots already sent. To Chen, governor, who's trying to manage a coalition that includes everyone from moderate suburban voters to revolutionary activists. That's a tough balance to maintain, especially if you apply the right pressure. After Morrison hung up, Abbott wheeled himself back to the dining room, where Cecilia was reading on her tablet. "How was your call?" she asked without looking up. "Complicated," Abbott replied. Wu's becoming a national figure, which makes him more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. Cecilia set down her tablet and looked directly at her husband. "Greg, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer." Abbott nodded. "Is this fight worth it? Is defeating one Houston Democrat worth the time, energy, and political capital you're spending on it?" Abbott was quiet for a long moment, considering his wife's question with the seriousness it deserved. Gene Wu represented more than just one Democratic vote in the Texas House. He was becoming a symbol of resistance to everything Abbott had tried to accomplish as governor. "Cecilia, if I let Wu turn every legislative fight into a national progressive cause, if I let him use the Texas House as a platform to build a national political career, it won't just be about one district. Other Democrats will follow his playbook. They'll turn Texas politics into California politics. And is that necessarily bad?" Cecilia asked quietly. Abbott looked at his wife with surprise. She rarely challenged his political judgment so directly. "I mean it, Greg. Maybe Texas is changing. Maybe the voters in Wu's District 10 districts like his represent the future of this state. Maybe instead of fighting that change, you should be figuring out how to work with it." Abbott felt a familiar stubbornness rising in his chest. He'd built his career on fighting changes he didn't agree with, on standing firm when others wanted to compromise or adapt. "Wu wants to turn Texas into something it's never been," Abbott said. "I want to keep it what it's always been. Those aren't compatible visions." Cecilia nodded, recognizing the tone that meant her husband had made up his mind. "Just remember," she said softly, "sometimes the cost of winning a fight is higher than the cost of losing it." As Abbott prepared for bed that night, he couldn't shake his wife's words, but he also couldn't shake the image of Gene Wu at that committee hearing, challenging Texas law with constitutional citations and moral authority, turning a routine legislative process into political theater. Tomorrow, Abbott decided, the real campaign against Gene Wu would begin. Not just opposition research or social media pressure, but a comprehensive strategy to neutralize the most effective Democratic voice in Texas politics. The question was whether Abbott was prepared for Wu to fight back with everything he had. 3 weeks after Wu's viral floor speech, the political landscape had shifted dramatically. In a downtown Houston hotel conference room, a group of 25 community leaders, activists, and political operatives had gathered for what they called a strategy session. But what everyone understood was a war council. Gene Wu stood at the front of the room, facing an audience that represented the breadth of his growing coalition. There was Maria Santos, the community organizer who had driven to Austin for the HB 1847 hearing. Dr. James Wright, a prominent African-American pastor whose congregation spanned multiple districts. Susan Chen, a tech entrepreneur who had become a major Democratic donor. And sitting in the back, almost invisible among the group, was David Patel, a young man with the intense focus of someone who understood modern political warfare. "Folks, we need to be honest about what we're facing," Wu began, his voice carrying the weight of the past month's revelations. "This isn't just about one bill or one election cycle. Governor Abbott has decided that our movement represents an existential threat to his vision of Texas." Wu gestured to Jennifer Martinez, who stepped forward with a thick folder of documents. "Jennifer's team has documented a coordinated campaign against not just me, but several progressive legislators across the state. Opposition research, social media manipulation, pressure on donors and supporters. This is sophisticated political warfare." Dr. Wright leaned forward in his chair. "Gene, my congregation includes families who are afraid to participate in civic life because of the rhetoric coming out of Austin. When the governor's allies start talking about cleaning house and accountability, people hear threats, which is exactly what they want," Wu replied. Fear suppresses turnout, discourages participation, makes people retreat from public life. But we can't let that happen. Susan Chen raised her hand. What's our strategy? We can't just play defense forever. Wu looked around the room, measuring faces, gauging commitment levels. What he was about to propose would require more than just political support. It would require people willing to put their reputations, their businesses, their personal safety on the line. We're going to do something that progressive Democrats in Texas have never done effectively, Wu said. We're going to take the fight to them. Not just defensively, not just reactively, but proactively. David Patel spoke up from the back of the room. Gene, I've been analyzing Abbott's social media engagement, his fundraising patterns, his public appearances. He's got vulnerabilities, but exploiting them requires resources and coordination we haven't had before. Wu nodded. David's right. We've been fighting with passion and principle, but they've been fighting with organization and money. That changes now. Jennifer stepped forward again. We've received commitments from National Progressive Organizations Democracy, For America, Movian, several others. They're willing to invest in Texas races, but they want to see that we have a real plan, not just good intentions. Maria Santos stood up. Gene, what does this mean for our communities? For the families who sent you to Austin to represent them, not to become a national political figure? It was the question Wu had been wrestling with for weeks. The tension between local representation and broader political leadership, between serving his district and serving as a symbol for progressive values nationwide. Maria, I understand that concern. It's something I think about every day. But here's what I've realized: I can't effectively represent our communities if the entire political system is rigged against us. If Abbott succeeds in silencing progressive voices, if he turns Texas into a one-party state where dissent is crushed, then all our local work becomes meaningless. Wu moved away from the podium, walking among the seated activists and community leaders. This isn't about my political career. It's about whether Texas will remain a place where diverse voices can be heard, where immigrant communities can participate in democracy, where working families have representation. Dr. Wright nodded slowly. So what are you proposing, specifically? Wu smiled for the first time in the meeting. We're going to run candidates against every single Republican legislator who voted for HB 1847. We're going to organize voter registration drives in every community that's been targeted by Abbott's policies. And we're going to make Greg Abbott defend his record in every corner of the state. The room buzzed with nervous energy. What Wu was describing wasn't just a political campaign, it was a comprehensive challenge to Republican dominance in Texas. Susan Chen looked skeptical. Gene, that's an enormous undertaking. The fundraising alone would require millions of dollars, which we're going to raise, Wu replied confidently. David, show them the numbers. David Patel opened his laptop and projected fundraising data onto the wall. Since Gene's floor speech, small dollar donations to Texas Democratic candidates have increased by 340%. National attention means national money, but more importantly, it means national organizing capacity. There's something else, Wu continued. Abbott's strategy depends on fighting us one at a time, picking off individual Democrats in isolated battles. But if we coordinate, if we make this a statewide movement, his advantages start to diminish. Jennifer pulled up a map of Texas on her tablet. We've identified 37 Republican-held seats where demographic changes and increased turnout could make them competitive. Not all of them are winnable, but if we force Abbott's allies to defend safe seats, they can't focus all their resources on targeting our incumbents. As the meeting continued, Wu could see the momentum building in the room. The fear and defensiveness that had characterized Democratic politics in Texas for years was being replaced by something that looked like hope, like determination. But Wu also knew that what they were planning would invite even more aggressive retaliation from Abbott. The governor had already demonstrated his willingness to make the fight personal. Escalating the conflict would mean escalating the personal cost for everyone involved. After most of the attendees had left, Wu remained in the conference room with Jennifer, David, and Maria Santos. The four of them represented different aspects of his coalition: professional political operatives, tech-savvy organizers, and grassroots community leaders. Okay, Wu said, now that it's just us, let's talk about the real risks. Abbott's not going to just sit back and let us build a statewide progressive movement. He's going to come after us with everything he's got. David nodded grimly. Gene, I need to tell you something. I've been monitoring your social media accounts, and the bot activity has increased dramatically. Someone is spending serious money to amplify negative content about you. How serious? 6-figure serious, maybe 7 figures. This isn't some grassroots backlash, this is professional political warfare, Jennifer added. And it's not just social media. We've had 3 major donors pull back their commitments in the past week. They're getting pressure from business associates, regulatory agencies, professional organizations. Wu felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Every person in this room was taking risks because they believed in what he represented. But their faith in him came with real costs: financial, professional, sometimes personal. Anyone who wants to step back, I understand, Wu said quietly. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Maria Santos laughed. Gene, my family fled El Salvador because we opposed a military dictatorship. You think I'm going to be intimidated by some Texas politicians? Wu smiled despite the gravity of the situation. All right then, let's build a movement. As they began to plan the details of their statewide strategy, none of them knew that Jake Morrison was sitting in a car in the hotel parking garage, photographing everyone who entered and left the meeting, building a comprehensive database of Wu's political network for Governor Abbott's growing opposition file. The death threat arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, slipped under the door of Gene Wu's district office like a piece of routine mail. Jennifer Martinez found it when she arrived early to prepare for a staff meeting, and her hands were still shaking when she called Wu at home. Gene, you need to get down here, and maybe call the police. Wu arrived at the office 20 minutes later to find Jennifer waiting with Officer Sarah Kim from the Houston Police Department's Threat Assessment Unit. The letter itself was simple, a single sheet of paper with words cut from magazines, promising that Wu would pay the price for his betrayal of Texas. Representative Wu, Officer Kim said, this is the 3rd threat we've documented against you in the past month. I strongly recommend we coordinate with Capitol Police to increase security at your Austin office as well. Wu studied the letter, feeling a mixture of anger and fear. The threat was vague enough to avoid criminal charges, but specific enough to be genuinely frightening. Officer Kim, my children go to school 5 blocks from here. My wife works downtown. This isn't just about me anymore. I understand, sir. We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood and coordinate with your children's school. But I have to ask, is there anything specific that might have triggered this escalation? Wu and Jennifer exchanged glances. The previous week, Wu had announced his statewide organizing initiative at a press conference that had received national media coverage. The response from conservative media and social media had been swift and vicious. We've been getting more aggressive in our opposition to Governor Abbott's agenda, Wu said carefully. Some people apparently don't appreciate that. After Officer Kim left, Wu sat in his office trying to process the morning's events. The letter was unsigned, untraceable, but its message was clear. The political had become personal, and the personal was becoming dangerous. His phone rang. Mia's name appeared on the screen. Gene, I just got a call from the kids' school. Someone called asking about their schedules, their pickup arrangements. The principal thought it was suspicious. Wu felt ice in his stomach. Where are the kids? Now at school, but I'm picking them up early. Gene, we need to talk about this, really talk. That evening, after the children were in bed, Gene and Mia sat in their living room having the conversation every political family dreads. Outside, a Houston police patrol car made regular passes down their quiet suburban street. I knew this. Life would be complicated, Mia said, curled up on the couch with a cup of tea. I knew there would be long hours, travel, public scrutiny, but I didn't sign up for our children being targets. Wu reached for his wife's hand. Mia, I can pull back. I can focus on local issues, stop the statewide organizing, keep my head down. Is that what you want to do? Wu was quiet for a long moment. No, but I want our family to be safe more than I want to change Texas politics." Mia studied her husband's face. After 15 years of marriage, she could read his expressions better than any political poll. "Gene, you're miserable when you're not fighting for what you believe in. I've watched you try to be a normal politician, and it doesn't work. You weren't built for compromise and incremental change. So what do? We get better security. We take reasonable precautions, and we don't let these people intimidate us into silence." "But Gene," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "You have to understand that every choice you make from now on affects all of us." Wu nodded. "I know, and I'm sorry it's come to this. Don't apologize, just be smart about it." The next morning, Wu arrived at the Capitol for a Democratic caucus meeting to find the hallways buzzing with rumors about Abbott's latest move. Jennifer met him at the elevator with an expression that mixed anger and admiration. "Gene, you need to see this," she said, handing him a printout of a press release. Abbott just announced a Texas Values Coalition, a new PAC, specifically designed to support primary challengers against radical Democrats in the state legislature. Wu scanned the document. The language was carefully crafted to avoid direct attacks while making clear that he was the primary target. References to extremist rhetoric, anti-Texas values, and outside agitators filled the text. "How much money?" Wu asked. "Initial funding of $5 million, with promises of more to come. And get this, the first candidate they're supporting is running against you." Wu looked up from the press release. "Who?" "David Park, the restaurant owner from your town hall." Wu felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. David Park had seemed genuinely concerned about economic development and local issues. The idea that Abbott's people had identified his concerns and turned them into a primary challenge was both impressive and terrifying. "Has he announced yet?" "This afternoon." "And, Gene, they've done their homework." Park's Korean-American, small business owner, talks about practical solutions instead of political fights. He's going to be a serious candidate. Wu slumped against the wall. Abbott wasn't just attacking him, he was offering his district an alternative that addressed real concerns about Wu's increasingly high-profile battles with state leadership. "There's more," Jennifer continued. "Park's campaign manager is Rebecca Martinez. You know her, right?" Wu nodded grimly. Rebecca Martinez was a respected Democratic operative who had managed several successful local campaigns. Her involvement meant this wasn't just a Republican-funded spoiler campaign, it was a serious effort with professional credibility. "So Abbott found a way to have Democrats attack me for him," Wu said. "Looks that way." Wu's phone buzzed with a text from David Patel. "Need to talk ASAP. They're going after our donor network." As Wu walked toward the caucus meeting, he realized that Abbott's strategy was more sophisticated than he'd imagined. The governor wasn't just trying to defeat Wu, he was trying to isolate him, to turn his own community against him, to make his political activism look selfish and counterproductive. The fight for Texas had entered a new phase, and Gene Wu was about to discover whether his movement was strong enough to survive a war of attrition against the entire Republican political machine. Inside the caucus meeting, Wu's fellow Democrats looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and concern. Everyone understood that Wu's high-profile resistance to Abbott had made him a target, but they also worried that his battles were drawing fire that might consume other Democratic legislators. "Gene," said Representative Sarah Martinez from El Paso, "we need to talk about how your situation affects the rest of us. Abbott's using you as an example of what happens to Democrats who get too aggressive." Wu nodded. "I understand, and I want to be clear, nobody should feel obligated to support me if it puts their own districts at risk." "That's not what I'm saying," Martinez replied. "I'm saying we need to figure out how to support each other without all of us becoming individual targets." As the meeting continued, Wu realized that his fight with Abbott had implications far beyond his own political career. The governor was trying to send a message to every Democratic legislator in Texas: challenge us too aggressively, and we'll destroy you. The question was whether Wu's movement was strong enough to send a different message: attack one of U.S. and you'll have to fight all of us. That election day 2020 for dawned gray and humid in Houston, with the kind of oppressive weather that seemed to mirror the political climate. Gene Wu stood outside Westwood Elementary School, his old elementary school now serving as his polling place, watching voters trickle in for what everyone knew would be the most consequential Democratic primary in District 137's history. The past 6 months had been a political education in modern campaign warfare. David Park's challenge had proven more formidable than Wu had initially expected. Park's message of practical solutions over political theater had resonated with moderate voters, frustrated by the constant battles between Austin and Washington. His campaign had been professionally run, well-funded, and strategically disciplined. Representative Wu called out Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who had warned him about investigators in his neighborhood months earlier. She approached with her adult daughter and grandson. "We voted for you." All 3 generations. Wu smiled, bowing slightly in the traditional Korean manner of respect. "Mrs. Chen, thank you. I hope I've earned your trust. You fight for us," she said simply. "That's what representatives should do." As Mrs. Chen's family entered the school, Wu's phone buzzed with updates from Jennifer Martinez, who was coordinating their Get Out the Vote operation from campaign headquarters. "Jean, turnout is higher than expected, about 35% so far. And it's only 2 p.m. That could go either way for us." Wu understood the math. High turnout usually favored him because his base was more motivated. But Park's campaign had done effective outreach to voters who typically skipped primary elections. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and Greg Abbott's unmistakable figure emerged from the passenger seat. Wu felt his stomach tighten as the governor wheeled himself toward the school entrance. Flanked by security and followed by a small group of reporters, the 2 men had never met face to face, despite months of political combat. As Abbott approached, Wu made a decision that would later be replayed on news programs across the state. "Governor Abbott," Wu said, extending his hand. Abbott paused, clearly not expecting a personal encounter. The cameras clicked rapidly as he shook Wu's hand. "Representative Wu, exercising your democratic right, I see. Just like you, Governor. Though I have to say, I'm surprised to see you voting in a Houston Democratic primary." Abbott's smile was thin. "I live in Austin, Representative. I'm just here supporting local democracy." The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but Wu knew it would be analyzed and dissected by political commentators for days. 2 men who had spent months attacking each other's vision of Texas, meeting politely at an elementary school polling place while cameras captured every gesture. After Abbott left, Wu remained outside the school, greeting voters and volunteers. The faces were familiar families from his neighborhood, activists who had supported him for years, community leaders who had worked alongside him on local issues. But there were also new faces, younger voters who had been inspired by his floor speech, national volunteers who had come to Texas to support his campaign, progressive activists who saw his race as a test case for challenging conservative dominance. "Jean," called out David Patel, jogging across the parking lot with his laptop bag. "We need to talk." They walked to Wu's car, where David opened his laptop and showed Wu real-time polling data. From their campaign's internal tracking, "It's close. Really close. We're ahead by about 3 points, but that's within the margin of error. Park's doing better in the affluent precincts than we expected." Wu studied the numbers. "What about the community organizing? The new voter registration, that's keeping us competitive. We registered about 3,500 new voters in the district, and early voting suggests they're turning out." But Park's campaign has been effective at framing this as a choice between local focus and national ambition. Wu's phone rang. The caller ID showed me his name. "How are you holding up?" his wife asked. "Nervous, hopeful, terrified. The usual election day emotions. The kids want to know if they can come to the watch party tonight." Wu hesitated. The election night event would be crowded, media heavy, and potentially emotional depending on the results. But it also represented everything he'd been fighting for: community engagement, democratic participation, the idea that politics could be a family affair rather than a blood sport. Bring them. Wu decided, win or lose, they should see how democracy works. As evening approached, Wu made his way to campaign headquarters, a rented space in a strip mall, between a Vietnamese restaurant and a Quinceañera dress shop. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. His political career had been built in spaces like this. Among the small businesses and working families that made up the backbone of his district, the first results came in around 8 p.m., showing Wu with a narrow lead based on early voting. But as precinct reports trickled in throughout the evening, the race tightened. Park was performing better than expected in middle-class neighborhoods, while Wu's margins in immigrant communities were smaller than in previous elections. "It's going to be a long night," Jennifer told the crowd of supporters gathered in the headquarters. But we knew this would be close. Wu stood at the front of the room, surrounded by family, staff, and volunteers who had spent months working toward this moment. His children sat in folding chairs near the front, wide-eyed at the adult energy swirling around them. "Whatever happens tonight," Wu said to the crowd, "we've accomplished something important. We've shown that progressive values can compete in Texas, that communities like ours can have a voice in state politics, that ordinary people can challenge powerful interests and make them fight for every vote." As midnight approached, the race remained close to call. Wu was ahead by less than 200 votes out of nearly 15,000 cast, with a few precincts still outstanding. Wu's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Representative Wu, this is David Park." Wu stepped outside into the humid night air. "David, Jean, I want to congratulate you. It looks like you're going to win by a narrow margin. And I want you to know that I respect the effort you and your team put into this campaign." Wu was surprised by the graciousness of Park's concession. "David, you ran a strong race. You pushed me to be a better candidate and to think more carefully about how I serve the district. Jean, can I ask you something? Of course, was it worth it? All the national attention, all the fights with Abbott, all the personal cost to you and your family?" Wu looked back through the window at his campaign headquarters, where his supporters were celebrating a narrow victory that felt like survival. His children were asleep in their chairs, exhausted by the late hour, but having witnessed their father defend his right to represent their community. "David, I think it was not because I won, but because we proved that democracy still works. We proved that voters can see through expensive attack campaigns and choose their own representatives. We proved that Abbott's money and organization aren't enough to silence voices he doesn't like." After hanging up, Wu remained outside for a few more minutes, savoring the quiet before returning to the celebration inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles with Abbott, new questions about the future of progressive politics in Texas. But tonight, Jean Wu had survived the first serious attempt to end his political career. More importantly, he had demonstrated that the movement he represented was bigger than any single candidate, stronger than any single attack, and more resilient than its opponents had imagined. The fight for the soul of Texas would continue, but tonight belonged to the people who believed that democracy was worth defending, one vote at a time.